According to government data, nearly 50 million Americans lack consistent access to food. Many depend on the charity of food banks.
America in 2025 is a place where you can buy an iPhone in 5 minutes, but wait an entire week to find a carton of eggs. That is the consequence we're facing now that two names that kept America's dinner table stable for 3 decades, Walmart and Tyson, are quietly pulling out. They're closing warehouses, halting factories, leaving towns where people lived off low prices. And then America changes day by day. Workers no longer receive SNAP benefits, and a simple meal suddenly becomes a luxury. Join me as we explore 10 cities entering a silent food crisis. And the big question is, will you, someone who once believed no one in America would go hungry, still have enough money to survive? Note that the following information is compiled from statistics and is not intended to defame any organization or individual. Number 1. Kurville, Texas. For the past 30 years in America, if there were two names present in nearly every working class meal, they were Walmart and Tyson. Walmart wasn't just the place with cheap goods, it was the place that made people feel they could still survive on $1.400 a month. And Tyson, they didn't advertise loudly, but their $2 frozen meat packs fed countless families from Missouri to New Mexico. For many Americans, those two names weren't brands, they were pillars. And Kurville, Texas, a small town nestled in the peaceful hill country, is the perfect example of how those two pillars once held a community together. The people here weren't rich, but they had enough. Walmart sat right in the center, open 24/7. Tyson had a processing plant nearby connected to local farms. Everything moved along quietly until the summer of this year. Tyson announced the closure of its plant. No prior warning, no town hall meeting, just a single fax notice. Before residents could react less than a week later, Walmart ceased operations at its regional distribution center. Then, like a reverse thunderclap, floods hit, washing away the road leading out of town. It was as if everything had been scripted. The two giants pulled out, then disaster struck and Kurville fell into paralysis. No one knows whether Walmart and Tyson were aware of the incoming flood, but perhaps they had already seen another brewing storm, a bleak cloud hanging over America's future. Rumor has it that the real reason behind Walmart and Tyson's withdrawal isn't simply restructuring. On one hand, new tariffs have all but wiped out profit margins at smaller facilities. On the other, the big beautiful bill, though marketed as pro-business, favors mega corporations with global scalability, not small-town operations with high costs and low returns. Walmart and Tyson aren't going bankrupt. They're just slowly pulling out of places that are no longer worth it in their cost-benefit equations. It was then that many realized how fragile their supply chain truly was. H-E-B, the town's largest supermarket, ran out of 70% of its fresh food in just 3 days. Trucks that once traveled Route 39 carrying eggs, meat, and vegetables were now stuck in the mountains, unable to reach Kurville. Not due to war, not due to fuel prices, but simply because no one is transporting food anymore. Because both Walmart and Tyson are gone from the map. Elderly residents relying on SNAP began lining up at aid stations run by Mercy Chef's Operation BBQ Relief. But they lacked more than just food. Their portions were cut due to new stipulations in the Big Beautiful Bill. It was as if their patience was being tested bit by bit first, losing access to cheap food, then losing the right to buy food altogether. A man over 70 told the local paper he didn't care how much inflation was or how much GDP had grown. All he knew was that today he couldn't buy a can of soup for under $3. And that's the reality millions of others across America are feeling, but no one is speaking out. Kurville is a small town, but precisely because it is small, it reveals a big truth. If even one link in the supply chain is pulled too fast, too close, the entire community collapses into chaos. No more Walmart, no more Tyson, no more roads, and more importantly, no more faith that at least there's still a grocery store. What's scarier than a flood is this: the flood will recede, the roads will be repaired, but who will bring Walmart back? Who will replace Tyson? No one answers. Kurville is simply the first place to clearly feel that America is no longer a place you can rely on what's always been there. And if it can happen here, a town that once had enough, once was stable, what awaits other places that are even more dependent places that don't even have an HEB to fall back on? Number 2, Miami, Florida. In Miami these days, the problem isn't whether food is available. The question is, what is it? Shelves are still full. There's meat, there's fish, there's produce. But in shoppers' eyes, doubt. A pack of beef at a suspiciously low price, but the label is blurry. The print crooked. A fresh fish, thawed from a styrofoam box left on the floor. Ground meat of a strange color, poorly packaged, and no one knows where it came from. Ever since Tyson stopped distributing meat in Florida's coastal areas, and Walmart cut off its logistics center near the port of Miami, everything changed without warning. No more familiar trucks arriving each morning. No more friendly price tags beside every tray of meat. No more sense of security when stepping into the supermarket. That gap didn't last long. It was quickly filled not with solutions but with uncertainty. Night markets sprung up everywhere, Little Haiti, Alapata, Liberty City. Makeshift trucks became mobile food counters. There people had to choose between trusting their instincts or skipping meals. A 64-year-old man in Little Havana told a local radio station he'd been vegetarian for 2 weeks. Not for religion, not for health, just because he wasn't sure what he was swallowing. For young people that might seem trivial, but for those over 50 who lived through decades of structured, clean, safe systems, that feeling is like being displaced from the life they once knew. Not because of hunger, but because of eating in fear. And maybe that's the feeling that makes Miami residents feel emptier than the shelves themselves. Because they still remember not so long ago, just a few years back, Walmart was where you could get clean chicken, traceable eggs, FDA standard packaged fish, all at an affordable price. Tyson once had the region's largest distribution hub just miles from the port of Miami, where trucks came and went constantly delivering fresh goods to every neighborhood, every little market. Back then, people had choices. Cheap if you wanted, clean if you preferred. Clear labeling. A simple meal was still a proper one. No one imagined that in just a few years, the entire system would vanish without explanation. Now there are no more choices, only gambles. And when we look across the border, the contrast is even more painful. In Regina, a small city in the Canadian prairies, people are celebrating their success in raising the world's most finicky cattle snow beef. A Japanese Wagyu variant, cared for in every meal and every step, now a culinary pride of the prairie. They call it the best meat you've ever tasted, not just for its flavor, but because they know exactly where it comes from, who raised it, and why it's worth the price. But in Miami, no one asks if the meat is tasty. People only ask, is it safe? The contrast isn't in flavor, but in the feeling of being left behind. Miami doesn't lack food, but people are lacking something even more important: trust in what they're putting on their dinner plates. And if Miami is a place where food is everywhere, but suspicion runs deep, then on the Pacific Coast lies another city facing the opposite crisis, where food has truly disappeared, where people no longer get to choose whether or not to buy, because what they want to buy is no longer there. Number 3, Los Angeles, California. In Los Angeles, people still joke if you live near Central Valley, the largest agricultural region in the US, then you'll never lack vegetables, milk, or fresh meat. But that was last year. Now in a city with a seaport, wholesale markets, upscale restaurants, and a tangled web of transportation routes, a bunch of fresh greens or a slab of beef once commonplace is something to carefully consider. Los Angeles doesn't lack supply. Just a few hours' drive north lies Central Valley, which produces 25% of the nation's agricultural output, nearly all the milk and fruit for California. If any place should be abundant, affordable, and fresh, it's LA. But the paradox began when Walmart and Tyson, the two biggest pillars of the distribution system, simultaneously withdrew. Walmart shut down its operations center near Inland Empire. Tyson stopped buying from the Fresno livestock farms. The once stable transport routes suddenly halted, not due to natural disaster, but because no one was left to keep the system running. When that gap formed, intermediary corporations quickly filled the space. But instead of stabilizing the market, they controlled it. Purchasing prices for produce were pushed to rock bottom. Farmers had to accept selling tomatoes at just 17 cents per pound, half of last year's price. Some dairy producers reported having their orders rejected for not meeting internal packaging standards. Meanwhile, consumers in inner-city Los Angeles had to pay double. A bunch of amaranth rose from $2 to $5. A bottle of regular milk now exceeds $7.99. A pork shoulder cut that used to cost $4.99 per 1 pound now exceeds $10, assuming it's even in stock. Worse still, no one is stepping up to regulate or clarify that price gap. Farmers are pressured on price, residents are pressured on cost, and in between that gap now belongs to invisible hands. Walmart used to be the backbone of the supply chain, large-scale consistent purchasing, keeping input prices stable. Tyson, while not perfect, had a clear procurement system and reliable logistics. When both left, the ecosystem wasn't just abandoned, it was replaced by a new model. No one takes responsibility. No one has the credibility to keep prices from spiraling. Vegetables, milk, meat. 3 essential food groups are still being produced every day just nearby. But the road to turning them into a complete meal on the table is increasingly rocky in both price and accessibility. Like a circulatory system with a broken artery, the heart still beats, but blood no longer reaches where it's needed. Many families, especially in the eastern or northern outskirts of LA, have resorted to fending for themselves, driving straight to Central Valley on weekends to buy food directly from farms. There, they can get fresh produce for half the city price. But while that idea sounds practical, it's not sustainable. Each trip takes 3-4 hours, burns gas time energy, and not everyone can do it week after week. And bitterly, to eat cheaper, they have to leave the very place they live. This is no longer a story about prices alone. It's about the loss of control, loss of choice, the broken connection between growers and eaters, right at the place called the heart of America's food system. And if even the heart can't pump blood anymore, what's happening in places further from the source? Number 4, Chicago, Illinois. For many working families in Southside Chicago, meals used to be the one thing they could control. Not luxurious, not abundant, just knowing what they'd cook, where to buy it, and how to make it last the week on a tight budget. But now even a simple dinner has become a stressful calculation. Chicago has long been a divided city, not just by its river, but by how people live and eat. In the north, around Lincoln Park or West Loop, you'll find Whole Foods organic delivery vans and imported meat counters with price tags not meant for those counting every dollar. But just a few blocks south in Englewood or Auburn Gresham, a different world emerges. A world where food isn't a choice, it's a quiet daily negotiation. When Walmart maintained warehouses in the south side and Tyson regularly supplied frozen chicken from a nearby plant in Rockford, things were still within reach. Working moms doing night shifts could conveniently stop by and buy a few pounds of meat to fry for their kids. A small weekend treat, no need for McDonald's, nothing extravagant. Just a quiet way to care to show love. Then one by one, those doors shut. Tyson pulled out stopping cheap meat supply. Walmart shut down its entire distribution network in the area. With no reasonably priced supermarkets, residents had to return to makeshift flea markets or family-run grocery stores, where goods were poorly packaged, prices handwritten, and quality depended on the day. People no longer bought what they wanted, just what was available. Meanwhile, wealthy neighborhoods in the north lived in another rhythm, orders placed with a few taps, choosing beef, chicken, organic eggs, a given. Not because they lived better, but because the system was built to serve them better. Walmart and Tyson's withdrawal didn't just leave a logistical hole. It suffocated something more silent, the right to choose. People used to be able to plan a week's meals for the family. Now what can $30 buy? Some days it's enough, some days just a few items no one really wanted. It's not about hunger, it's about no longer being able to decide what you eat. Englewood has now officially become one of the largest food deserts in the state, where supermarket density is less than 1 per 10,000 residents. At the same time, more than 205,000 Illinoisans face the risk of losing SNAP benefits due to new federal work requirements. Those who once used food stamps to buy groceries must now line up at local pantries, where aid is scarce and need is high. SNAP enrollment dropped 8.5% just in early July, and grocery trips declined accordingly, meaning people aren't just poorer on paper, they're actually eating less, and increasingly feeling voiceless in this society. Chicago isn't the only place bearing these cracks. Smaller, seemingly more peaceful cities are also starting to fracture. Can you guess which is the fifth? Number 5, Portland, Oregon. Portland used to be the place where people believed you could live kindly to the environment, eat clean, and still stick to a family budget. You didn't have to be rich to live green. Small farmers markets chains like New Seasons, and even Walmart with affordable organic food aisles, all formed an ecosystem that made Portland the pride of those pursuing a sustainable lifestyle. Walmart provided price stability. Tyson ensured a reliable source of quality frozen chicken at reasonable cost. Thanks to that, a single mother or a retiree could bring home clean eggs, some organic greens, maybe even a piece of farm-raised meat to make a familiar dish for the grandkids without needing a restaurant. That wasn't luxury, it was a cultural choice. But then a series of events happened almost simultaneously. Walmart quietly pulled out of suburban distribution centers. Tyson cut supply chains in the Northwest due to rising transport costs after wildfire seasons. Fuel prices kept climbing, logistics costs peaked, and so what used to be within reach slowly slipped away. You might not feel it clearly at first. Egg prices rose just a few cents per week. Milk, bread, green vegetables, same. But one day you looked at your grocery bill and were shocked. A dozen clean eggs, $6, even $7. A bunch of organic vegetables, $5. A carton of plant-based milk, nearly $8. Suddenly, what used to be routine became a test of your wallet. Imagine you've lived in Portland for 20 years, always believed in responsible consumption. Each week you bought from farms, avoided red meat, minimized plastic waste. You didn't see it as a green trend, just a fitting way to live. But now every market trip makes you weigh, should I skip organic greens this week? Get the cheaper kind from California eggs, maybe switch to the regular ones? Not because you've changed, but because the system has. In Lake Oswego or Happy Valley, people still order farm boxes regularly. Pasture-raised chicken still gets delivered to doorsteps. But in Beaverton, Hillsboro, or Gresham, many families now line up at food pantries or only see New Seasons as a last resort, even though prices are up to 40% higher than Walmart. Some working families have gone back to growing vegetables in backyards, joining urban grower groups to maintain the old lifestyle, but everyone knows it's just a stopgap. When the supply chain is choked by cost taxes and lack of competition, clean food becomes a luxury item, no longer a right. Maybe you're living where things are still easy. But if a city like Portland, once the icon of ethical consumption, is being pushed back by the market like this, then who's next? Number 6, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Imagine living in North Philly, a place where you know every corner, every street, every quiet little store like a family member. A place where in the morning you could step outside, walk a few minutes, and buy eggs, vegetables, milk, then return home in time for breakfast. A place where everything was just enough. Not luxurious, but sufficient to live. Now you're still standing on that same street, but the stores are closed. The supermarket that once sold cheap frozen meat is gone, and in its place is an empty nail salon or a pharmacy displaying a few shelves of canned food. Without a car, unfamiliar with technology, you look around and ask yourself, what will I buy, where, and how? Philadelphia wasn't struck by a natural disaster. Nor was it because of skyrocketing prices. It was because the infrastructure, the links that kept daily life running, quietly disappeared. Walmart shut down 3 major locations in North and West Philly without fanfare. Tyson cut off supply at the end of 2024, followed by a series of small stores that couldn't handle the rising input costs. For those who've lived here for decades, this isn't just about losing a supermarket, it's losing a habit, losing the power to choose, losing a rhythm of life they once believed was sustainable. Don't mistake this for a poverty issue. Many still have SNAP benefits in hand, still have bank accounts, but simply there's no longer a decent place for them to spend that money. Some areas like Germantown or Frankfurt, where up to 30% of residents are elderly, now have no grocery store within walking distance. Some people have to go 2 miles just to buy a bag of potatoes, and with current gas prices, each trip might cost $12, nearly half a meal. The biggest loss isn't food, it's the access to food, in a safe, stable way without begging or depending on others. When Tyson and Walmart were here, they didn't just bring goods. They brought a network truck supply chains, delivery schedules, local stores that depended on the larger system. Then suddenly that network collapsed. The elderly don't order online. Workers can't leave their shifts to take 2 buses just to buy a few cans of beans. The remaining stores are small, sparsely stocked, overpriced, and don't accept SNAP. That's when you realize buying a loaf of bread has become a tiring journey, sometimes an impossible one. Number 7, Boise, Idaho. Boise in the blazing summer has potatoes piled up in the fields. Freezers are still full of meat. Farms still operate and farmers still harvest diligently every morning. Yet strangely, supermarkets are no longer bustling. People walk past food aisles, gently touch the packaging, then put it back hesitant. Not because of high prices, not because of a lack of money, but because of a vague, quiet unease that's spreading between the fully stocked shelves. Since Walmart pulled out of the distribution chain in the West and Tyson stopped buying beef and chicken from local farms, the gap isn't just logistical, it runs deeper into the minds of consumers. For the first time in years, people in Boise are looking at their own local products with skepticism. Something has changed. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough to shake the trust they once had. It's understandable. News of American produce being rejected by the EU, concerns about pesticide residue, the silent withdrawal of large corporations. All like small puzzle pieces accumulating into a blurry picture if even Tyson no longer wants to do business here. What reason do consumers have to keep placing their trust? We can sympathize. Imagine standing in a supermarket looking at 2 packs of meat. One from a local farm, one imported with clean packaging and a safety seal. Which would you choose? Not because you hate in-state produce, but because you're no longer sure you can trust it. And when buying food feels like a gamble, people tend to pick the safer bet even when it breaks their heart. Many families in Boise have started eating less, not because they've become poorer, but because they no longer feel happy stepping into the kitchen. They've stopped stocking up, stopped cooking large meals, stopped saying our meat is better than store-bought. Instead, there's a quiet doubt something has broken in the bond between people and their own land. Save Our Idaho fairs are still held calling to rescue local produce, but even when people show up, take photos, the amount sold falls far below expectations. One farmer once said, "If you can't sell to your neighbors, what hope do you have with distant customers?" The pain isn't in the unsold goods. It's in being turned away by your own community due to lost trust. something that can't be bought or reproduced. Number 8, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Perhaps the 8th city is the most unique story today, because here people aren't hungry for food, they're hungry for familiar flavors. Minneapolis was once America's pork capital. At one time, you only had to go a few miles to see pig farms trucks lined up heading into Tyson's plant, and by the next morning, fresh meat appeared in supermarkets and local markets. But those days are gone. Tyson pulled out of the area last year, no longer buying pigs from this region, partly due to restructuring, partly because tariffs and high operating costs led them to abandon the local retail market. And the result, consumers, especially those who've lived here all their lives, began to realize they could no longer find meat from their own hometown. Supermarkets still have meat, but they're frozen packs imported from hundreds, even thousands of miles away. The supplier names are unfamiliar. The production date is stamped clearly, but what the animal ate where it was raised, no one knows. Even more frustrating is that prices haven't dropped. In fact, sometimes they're higher than when Tyson was still operating. Paying $14 for a pack of frozen meat without knowing which state it came from, it makes consumers feel excluded from the game. Behind the supply chain, pig farms in Minnesota are gradually disappearing. Without large contracts, without stable demand, they either liquidate or shrink so much they can't go on. And on the consumer end, people are increasingly disconnected from what once felt familiar. It feels like living in a food market without being invited to the table. Unlike Kurville, where food was scarce due to natural disasters, or Boise, where people fear local food, Minneapolis is where consumers no longer know if the meat on their plate still belongs to them. An invisible divide is forming. Meat still reaches people's hands, but no longer touches the hearts of those who grew up with it. And perhaps the most bitter part is this: they don't want to eat less, don't want to go vegan, don't want to buy premium products, they just want to eat the way they used to with familiar trust. But when every piece of meat comes from somewhere unfamiliar, then even a full meal no longer warms the heart as it once did. Number 9, Boston, Massachusetts. A carton of milk with just 3 days left before it expires. A soft loaf of bread from yesterday now gone hard. A tray of chicken marked best by January still sitting on a shelf in mid-May. These items aren't from a relief warehouse, they're on sale in a supermarket at the heart of Boston, once considered the pride of America in academia, healthcare, and technology. People in Boston are not starving, but more and more are beginning to ask themselves, why are we eating things others have chosen to throw away? The change hasn't been loud, but it's deep enough for anyone who's lived here long to notice. Ever since Walmart shut down in a series of suburbs and Tyson cut off its bulk food supply chain that had long helped stabilize the retail system in the Northeast, a quiet void has formed. Small stores sprang up quickly, followed by new distribution chains for near-expired goods dubbed relief products or reused food. But the line between sharing and discarding seems to be fading fast. No one says it out loud, but the sense of being sorted lingers in every aisle. You're not hungry enough to skip a meal, but you also no longer feel sure that you get to eat like everyone else. A report from Mass General Brigham in early 2025 stated that more than 1/3 of households in Massachusetts are facing food insecurity. Not because food is lacking, but because more and more people feel unsure whether the food in their hands can be trusted. Boston once led the way in food equity, with the model of one supermarket for every community. But when the two retail giants pulled out, what was left wasn't just unstable goods, but a subtle disorder in how society allocates quality of life. Those who once believed that no one would be left behind in this city are now growing used to a new reality to eat something normal. Sometimes you have to drive much farther, or pay much, much more. No one's forcing you to eat near-expired food. But if that's all there is around you, what choice do you have? And the point isn't that you can't afford better, it's that the entire system doesn't let you feel worthy of the most basic things. Boston doesn't lack food, it lacks fairness in every meal, and when people begin to question their dignity through near-date packages, this is no longer a consumption issue. It's a warning to other cities food crises might not begin with hunger, but with the moment you no longer know what you're eating or how you're being fed. And if you think that's enough for today, wait until the last city. Number 10, Denver, Colorado. No protests. No long lines hoarding food. No angry tweets. When Walmart closed some stores and Tyson pulled out of the Rockies, the people of Denver didn't scream. They quietly went to their backyards, dug up the dirt-planted vegetables, and rebuilt what once seemed like a distant memory. A place that used to rely on major retail chains for nearly 60% of its food is now witnessing a silent but clear transformation. Just months after the supply chain fractured, empty plots of land began sprouting green strawberries, even squash trellises. Some planted to live, some to share, and some just for the sense of touching something they could truly control. No one expected that growing vegetables, raising chickens, and composting would become a response to a broken market. But for many, it was the only way not to bow their heads to the increasingly irrational prices of a carton of eggs or a bunch of greens. Walmart and Tyson's withdrawal didn't just raise prices, it left behind a massive hole in trust. And Denver, instead of patching that hole with anger or nostalgia, chose something gentler to fill it with human hands. You'll see it clearly in ordinary neighborhoods like 5 Points or Baker Low fences. Bright red tomatoes passed from one house to the next like a greeting. Fresh eggs traded for a loaf of toasted bread. No fanfare, no delivery apps or membership cards, just quiet agreements between people who once were Walmart customers, now turned into old-school traders. Maybe no one calls this an economy, but the truth is, when the supermarket chain withdrew, a smaller chain was woven in its place, made of trust. No one knows for sure when winter will stop the gardens from growing, but they know this: the neighbor will gladly share half a jar of strawberry jam. They don't demand perfectly clean food, they just want to know where it came from and who made it. Ending this list, Denver doesn't carry the sadness of Los Angeles nor the frustration of Boston. This city chose another way, not letting its meals depend on anyone else. America today is changing in quiet ways. The retreat of Walmart and Tyson is not a collapse. It's the sign of an era where even meals are no longer a given. Some worry, some are angry, but some communities are starting over with gardens with shared eggs, shared greens, and shared survival skills. If no one comes to save you, then you and your neighbors can start rebuilding yourselves. If this video resonates with how you feel, share your story. Leave a comment below, because maybe your story is exactly what someone else is looking for. This video does not advocate for the division of the United States or promote secession. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and encouraging discussion based on current events, emotions, and social trends. We respect the U.S. Constitution and all federal regulations.